Okay, good morning. We are hosting today's Defense Innovation Board meeting at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., which is also the 2019 Nationals World Series champions. So, my name is Colleen Laughlin, and I am the designated federal officer for the Defense Innovation Board. If you have not done so already, please silence your phones. Today's meeting is being recorded and live streamed to allow members of the public to attend the meeting virtually. Thank you to the Defense Media Activity for providing their expert support to this event. We welcome to all of our in-person and virtual attendees. The board will now convene its session. As we begin this public meeting, allow me to share a few procedural remarks. The board is a discretionary, independent advisory board operated under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government and Sunshine Act. Today's meeting was announced in the Federal Register Notice, posted October 29. The public was invited to submit written comments for the board members to consider. There were 15 written comments received. There have been no significant changes to the meeting's agenda as posted in the Federal Register Notice. Depending on time constraints, there may be an opportunity for members of the public to provide verbal comments to the board today at the end of the meeting. As a reminder, these are comments to the board and not a question-answer session. With that, I will now turn the meeting over to the board's executive director, Joshua Marcuse, for opening remarks and introduction of our members.
Thanks very much, Colleen, and welcome everyone. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to what I think will be a very substantive and productive conversation. Let me introduce you to our board members. We have our chair, Dr. Eric Schmidt, technical advisor at Alphabet, former CEO of Google, former executive chairman of Alphabet. Dr. Michael McQuaid, the vice president of research, Carnegie Mellon University. We have Mr. Milo Medin, the vice president of wireless services at Google. Dr. Richard Murray, professor of control and dynamical systems and bioengineering at Caltech. Ms. Jennifer Polka, the founder and executive director of Code for America and a former deputy chief technology officer of the United States of America. Dr. Daniela Roos, director of computer science and artificial intelligence laboratory, CSAIL, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Mark Sarangelo, the entrepreneur in residence at the University of Colorado and a former executive vice president of Sierra Nevada Corporation. We also have many board members calling in. On the line is Kurt Delbene, the Chief Digital Officer of Microsoft, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Director of the Hayden Planetarium, Dr. Missy Cummings, the Director of the Humans and Autonomy Lab and Professor of Engineering at Duke University, and one of the first female fighter pilots in the Navy. We have Ms. Marnie Levine, VP of Global Partnerships and Business Development at Facebook, and the former COO of Instagram, as well as Professor Adam Grant, Professor of Organizational and Behavioral Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and Danny Hillis, the founder of Applied Minds. So, a full house today. So the agenda, which you all have in your program, but I'll just briefly run through, is going to begin with a few opening remarks from our chair, followed by a workforce behavior and culture subcommittee update. We're expecting 2 recommendations from the subcommittee to come to the floor for the board as a whole. And after the subcommittee update, we'll be looking at a science and technology subcommittee update. Dr. Richard Murray will be leading. We have 4 topics to cover in that area, including the much anticipated report on AI ethics that the board has done, the culmination of over a year of work. And then I and my colleague Jeff Bowling in the front row will give an implementation update to the board members on behalf of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, as we do at all of our meetings, to let the board members know what the department has done with prior recommendations that they've received. After that, we'll get to what I always feel is the really fun part, the public comment period. So I will be inviting people that requested a comment or submitted a comment in advance to come first, and time permitting, and I hope there will be, we'll ask members of the audience to also have an opportunity to come forward and make a no more than 2-minute comment. And unfortunately, I have to remind you, it's not a question and answer, but it is a chance for you to be heard by the board and by the public in general. If you would like to make a comment, please do fill out a comment card, because we do need to have your name and contact information for our records. So thank you very much for that. I also want to point out that we are going to talk about a lot of rich content and material today, and all of that material is available for you to look at on your mobile devices at innovation.defense.gov, our website. So you can look at that information there. And for those of you following at home, our Twitter handle is @InnovationBoard, and that's just another way to continue the conversation. We encourage you to use that. And with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Schmidt, our chair.
Thank you. Well, thank you both, Colleen and Josh. It's great to be here. This is the first time we've been to Georgetown doing this. For those of you that are new to this, we welcome having our meetings in public, and you'll hear us have debates that hopefully are of interest to you, and you'll see how we work. A lot has happened. Our last meeting was in July at DIU in Mountain View, California, and perhaps the most important thing is we have a new Defense Secretary, Secretary Esper, somebody we've known for a long time. We got to work with him when he was running Secretary of the Army, and he clearly is pushing on innovation. He's made all sorts of statements about AI and talent management and the other themes that we care about. We are housed under Secretary Griffin, who has also been as part of the what is known as RD&E, and he has been pushing very hard an agenda around microelectronics, commercial space, strengthening ties to universities, as well as the historic things we've been doing, and it's a very, very good fit for us. Secretary Lord, whom we've done a series of events with earlier this year, continues to be a very strong advocate of modernizing software. You can imagine how hard her job is with older software than it needs to be. And so we released this thing called the SWAP report, which we're going to give you an update on, and she's really pushing for reforms on acquisition. And another idea that she's been working on with us with our feedback is something called trusted capital, where you basically can accelerate the private sector working with the DoD for innovation and just getting the procurement sort of mess much more innovative and much more driven. We're very, very proud that this joint AI center, which we had a little bit of a role in suggesting and promoting, is progressing. They're recruiting, they have their own website, so forth. So if you're interested in this, please follow it up. Now, there's lots and lots of innovation. People are finally figuring out that innovation matters, something we've been talking about for years. The White House, for example, has just recreated the President's Council for PCAS, which I think is an exceptionally good idea since I was on the last one, along with a few others that are here. So that's very, very good news, and we're really excited about that. There's a Future of Defense Task Force, which is a bipartisan commission. And then next week on November 5th, we're having a meeting of something called the National Security Commission for Artificial Intelligence, and I know about it on Tuesday because I'm its chairman, and I'm sure that you'll want to come to that if you're interested in these areas. And again, it's quite open to everybody. So basically, our agenda is pretty straightforward. We need continued collaboration between private sector, universities, the DoD, all the stakeholders in the ways that we're going to talk about today. So anyway, some of the things that, in my view, we should have been doing sooner and now we're doing, right? So they're really important. Have to do with, for example, people and culture, right? We're now finally engaged in that in a substantive way. There's a whole program which we call Workforce Now, which is really try to deal with what I call the digital readiness crisis. The core problem is we still don't have the human resource that's necessary to do the mission of the DoD and defend the nation and all those sorts of things. And there's a whole proposal that's coming out from us called a campaign for an AI ready force. So you have the digital problem, and then within the digital problem, you have the specific AI problem. And the real question is, how does the military get the AI ML talent through its procurement processes, through partners, through universities, through joint ventures, through FFRDCs, however they're done. We're seeing lots of interest in the concept that the military folks use is called the battle network. And the battle network is basically getting all these systems, which from their perspective are disparate, connected so they can sort of figure out what's going on and make better decisions. Makes good sense to me. We have produced a recommendation called the Fully Networked Command, Control, and Communications, which is focused on looking at the next generation network architecture. If I can just offer my own opinion, the problem with these systems is that they were never designed to work together. And so when they don't work together, when they weren't designed to work together, by the way, they don't work together. And it drives our the people who protect us and the leaders and so forth insane, and I understand why. So in the last meeting, continuing through just a quick survey, Kurt, who's on the phone, led an in-depth discussion of zero trust architecture principles and best practices. And the core idea is to imagine that you can't trust the network, but you still have to use it, right? A reasonable precaution if you're in the national security space. Pretty good rule, and we like this approach, and we're obviously working on this. We'll hear from this. I think that this year the biggest news was our SWAP study, which I think Richard is going to update us on, and we're going to sort of update it a little bit, and I think Jeff is going to talk a little bit about it. Is that right, Jeff? So you hear much more about it. And then something which we've been separately working, which I think, Michael, you've been largely driving personally with our help, is this notion of what should the AI ethics and AI principles for the DoD look like. I want to emphasize that this is our proposal to them. This is not their policy, right? So we're trying to help them. We are a federal advisory committee. Our job is to provide advice. We are not in charge, and we're not allowed to implement stuff, but we are allowed to throw them ideas which we think are well thought, and hopefully they'll receive. And we have every indication that they will, and they'll be very interested in our recommendations. So you'll hear all of that play out. And then, of course, we'll have all of our public comment and so forth and so on. So maybe, shall we just start, Jen, with you? So Jen is the co-chair of the Workforce Behavior and Culture Subcommittee.
Yes.
And sort of, there's actually a number of things you're doing. So maybe you could take through them.
Yeah, we're going to talk about two of them today, and thank you very much for that setup. My co-chair, Adam Grant, I believe, is on the phone, so I'm going to be presenting on behalf of him and me and the other members of the subcommittee, and of course representing the fantastic work of the staff who put together so many of these wonderful interviews. The two things we're going to talk about, as you mentioned, are really what we would characterize as a digital workforce readiness crisis and what we propose to do about it, particularly what we want to do about it now, which is why this recommendation is called Workforce Now. In the context of the recommendations that we made. When did we make those original recommendations?
Like 2 years ago.
2 years ago. They are certainly moving along, but this is an effort to say it's wonderful that there is some progress. There needs to be more immediate action now, and that's what this one's about. And then I'll speak briefly to what the department needs to consider to develop an effective AI-ready force. But let's start with the Workforce Now recommendation. Obviously, the context here is that the DoD is charged with protecting the nation and deterring adversaries, but to do that in today's world, we have to cultivate a workforce that can rapidly deploy and adopt technology. And so as part of the work of this subcommittee, the DIB staff and board interviewed over 50 people, people in uniform and out of uniform. Some of these people have the skills in digital technologies and innovation that the department very much needs, and the others that we interviewed are involved in service talent management initiatives because they have a lot of perspective on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. So I have a lot to say about what we're going to recommend, but I just wanted to start with some of these stories. They, I believe, are now on the website at innovation.defense.gov. And if you go to the meeting tab and scroll down, there's a list of the documents, and I think those have just been put up or will be soon put up. One of these documents contains almost a dozen stories. And I just wanted to share briefly two of them because it really brings to life this issue that we're talking about here as it relates to the talent the department needs and how we are not doing what we should to develop, retain, and recruit them. So this is, names have been removed, but our team interviewed, for instance, an Army logistics officer who attended a top civilian university after he completed his company command assignment. He got to go to a program called the Advanced Civil Schooling Program, and he earned his MBA in a data-centric analytics program. He was then supposed to do a follow-on utilization tour in a role that would leverage his new academic knowledge. But instead of putting this officer in a data-centric role, the Army sent him to a major training center and then assigned him to serve as a medical service corps officer. This is completely unrelated to his training as a logistics officer or to his MBA. The officer then served for 1 year in that position, but he was still eager to use his skills in the service of his country. And he knew that a great place for him to add value would be as an Operations Research Systems Analyst, Analysis Officer, ORSA. So ORSAs use quantitative and qualitative analysis to improve operations and decision-making. This is what we're looking for. The Army sent this officer to an intensive 4-month training program to qualify him in the ORSA area. And then, following his ORSA training, the officer was assigned to a Personnel Development Office, PDO, position. And what he does there is essentially administrative staff work. He makes PowerPoint presentations and builds briefing binders. Here he fills a needed billet, which is the sort of the language that we're working in, but he doesn't use any of the skills that he was trained for. So we've paid for a phenomenal, expensive training. It's very highly valued, both in the DoD and, of course, in the private sector, but we're really wasting this man's abilities. At least in that story, we retained this officer. We have another story of an Air Force imagery analyst staff sergeant who taught himself to code. He did this completely on his own using online resources. He jokes that he's a student at YouTube University with a degree in using Google effectively. This is a fantastic initiative and exactly what we need. So he's moved through all these assignments, and he's seen a number of ways that he could improve unit operations and processes with software applications if he had time to build them. But he has a job, of course, and his primary job responsibilities have kept him from really building those software applications despite having the skills, and they could have enormous impact. This airman has also commented, as an aside note, on the difference between the open source communities online that he leverages and how they do software and the way coding is done in the military. So in the military, he's facing a near total lack of access to the latest tools and collaboration platforms, but what we have for free out there that he can do in his spare time is much more robust. So this has been an additional challenge that will sound familiar from our SWOC report. So this man has 6 years of experience and has decided to accept a technical, he had to decide between accepting a promotion to technical sergeant or leaving active duty. And he really wanted to code full time. And what this meant is that a promotion would really take him further from operations into management. And since he wanted to continue serving his country using the skills that he had developed and he knew the department needed, he actually left and he transitioned into reserves into an intelligence position. So the good news is he's in a civilian software engineer and he gets to code with a great team and he's in the reserves. But this is another example of how we could have retained the talent that the department so desperately needs. So again, there's almost a dozen of these stories. I very much encourage you to read them. If you do, you'll see this pattern. So over and over again, we have dedicated and passionate service members who see what the department needs. They know what the department needs, and they want to provide it, but the system is so much working against them. Now, because of what we've learned from these interviews, today we're making a recommendation that builds off of the previous Defense Innovation Board recommendations on building technology, capability, and capacity. And we're calling for more immediate actions to better use and retain those active duty service members who have what we're calling digital innovation skills. These are, first, technical skills such as modern software development, data science, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And second, non-technical skills, such as rapid capability development and adoption, and applied innovation methodologies, such as design thinking and lean startup. I'll put myself in that second category, so a shout out to all those folks who don't have the technical skills but can still contribute. And in both of these cases, these skill sets rely on critical thinking, experimentation, and very importantly, iteration, based on feedback from use in the real world. These skills simply aren't yet supported within any existing career tracks. These are the driving mechanisms through which the military services train, develop, and advance specialized talent. So while we are waiting for the personnel systems to catch up with the new skill requirements, the department is underutilizing existing talent and we're losing people to frustration. So we identified 4 aspects of the personnel system that make it challenging to match the talent to the mission, and they are defined career paths that must be followed and can't be deviated from without great cost to the individual, a perceived need for operational tours before digital innovation assignments, a very rigid billeting system, and there's a sort of slightly depressing story about that in the stories if you can read them on the website, and assignments to digital and innovation office being perceived as coming at the expense of mission readiness, when in fact they are about mission and readiness. So we are making 3 recommendations. 1, the fastest and highest impact will come from making it easier for the most qualified people with digital skills to work in offices that can best use their skills. We're talking about the Joint AI Center, the Defense Innovation Unit, AFWorks, NavalX, and some others. These entities should be given greater flexibility to bring on the people that they need to fulfill their missions. And that means giving them much greater flexibility, and particularly with billets. Second, the DoD should prioritize using and retaining service members with digital innovation skills. Our recommendation is to create a new program within each service, which would take these select individuals off their current career paths and separately manage their promotions and assignments. Third, the DoD should speed up the process to create more permanent pathways to recruit, train, hire, and develop people to effectively adopt and apply digital capabilities across the force. That's a summary of what we're talking about today. I know to my colleagues, you've all read our recommendation, and you can read them on the website, and I would like to open it up for comment from the other board members.
Jen, thank you for this excellent summary. I would like to strengthen your comment about the personal stories. The personal stories really make the issues real, and I would like to add that several of my students I have trained in AI, machine learning, and robotics have gone to serve and have underutilized their skills. But I would also like to say that we are observing good progress from the department in understanding that these are real issues. And so, for instance, the JAIC, the Air Force, the Army are beginning to start centers where part of the collaboration with universities involves training, in the case of MIT, the airmen in the latest advancements in AI. Question is how to scale it up, right. Because in the current efforts, a small number of select airmen can come, for example, for our Air Force Center.
Absolutely, we just need more.
Yes.
So maybe I'll just say, Jen, also, I think, as you mentioned, some of these things reflect some of the things we saw in the software acquisition and practices report that we did. And there's just such an amazing amount of talent that's out there, I think, especially in the enlisted ranks, that we are not taking advantage of. And so, you pointed this out in some of your stories, and there are also some of the other ones that are there. I think people want to figure out, we all understand the importance of software and the importance of digital technologies and other things in the Department of Defense mission, and people want to contribute and are ready to contribute. We have to figure out how to take advantage of that. And as you say, I think, and as Daniela said, I think the services are moving in that direction, but we need to, in addition, start doing things now, because we're losing some of those people, and it'll be hard to bring them back. So I think there's a tremendous talent pool out there, and we just need to take advantage of it. And I think this is a good way to get started.
Absolutely. One of the other stories, I'm sorry, Mark, did you want to?
No, I was just going to add to Richard's point was that it's not only the effect of losing the people, it's the chilling effect on the next generation of people behind them who will make the decision not to follow that path because they see that it has led to nowhere for very talented people. And I think sometimes we miss that part of the equation, and it's going to have an effect for many years to come on the next groups of people, because there is a lot of communication between these different service people.
So let me ask the obnoxious question. So why is the system not aware of these problems and fixing them? In other words, it's not like this is the first time we've identified this problem. What is preventing? Is there some law? Is it culture? Is it leadership? What's the problem?
I think there just needs to be some air cover from the top as it relates to things like billeting. So what we saw in the stories over and over again was, as an outsider, I would assume that someone very high up in the hierarchy would have the ability to, the term is by name request, would be able to say, this person has those skills, I'm a 3-star general, I need that person, and they would get them. And what's happening is that even that is not working because the billing system and other things are so rigid that there is so much process needed to get over that. There's a really profound story in there about a talented young person who was put into a position but and then had to leave. That position was so limited in what it could then be filled with because of the building system that it's going to be impossible to refill. So we need to, I think, relax some of those constraints.
Well, the reason I'm pushing this is, so I've talked to the generals who say that all of these weird processes prevent them from doing the right thing. So for example, let me give you an example. You could imagine a process where once a quarter, a list of people who were uniquely talented in the area that you're describing was made, and then the secretary or somebody said a memo saying, these people need to be protected in the work that they're doing. I'm trying to think of a way to blow through the bureaucracy.
And that's the third recommendation that we're making, is exactly that.
Yeah.
Got it.
I would just add, I think part of the problem is not just protecting them, but making sure their career in the military isn't destroyed because you took them on this detour off the normal path. I think the service, when we've talked to folks in personnel readiness and in the services, they recognize the system has to be more flexible, and they're trying to make changes to enable that. I think the issue is the rate of change and rate of diffusion is still not dealing with demand. And I think it's interesting, the U.S. workforce has moved quite a bit, right? People don't work for the same company for 20 years. People move around. They don't work in the same job description with their traditional jobs, and jobs have become much more multidisciplinary in nature. And the government processes sort of make adapting to that change in the national workforce slower. Yeah. And so I think what you're trying to do with this recommendation, should the department adopt it, is to accelerate that integration of the change that's happened in the civilian workforce already.
Yeah. I mean, one last thing I'd like to stress that will come across if you read these stories is the number of people who are actually very much willing to take a hit in their career to do the right thing. It's truly inspiring. We shouldn't be making them do that, but we should also honor that instinct and make it possible for them to do that. That's the thing. They're willing. They're willing to have a little career risk, but even with that, we're rotating these people out, and they're not actually able to use their skills to do what they know needs doing.
I know that Adam on the line also would like to make a comment, and we may want to just check others on the line. Eric? Adam?
Hey, this is Adam. So I had a question that really stems out of the work that we've been doing over the last few months. I'm struck that the scale of DoD allows us to identify a lot of people who have digital capabilities. The scale makes it also very difficult to find those needles in an overwhelming haystack. And so I was curious if anyone has thoughts on how we can do a good job identifying the people whose skills would be most useful in this area.
Adam, do you mean within the DoD? In other words, already present or from outside? Well, let's see if we can answer his question.
I think he means inside, yeah. Anybody have any ideas?
My experience with talent groups is people know who the people are, you just have to ask. So you need some process where you can identify it, but typically in our tours of the DoD, the people who we meet with know the other person even though they're in a different group and so forth. They've met them in some context. So I think a collection process where you say, look, just tell us who the really, really capable people are in this area, you probably get 70% coverage right there.
And I think a lot of these people are self-identifying because they know the department needs their skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another idea is to maybe create opportunities that are outside of the regular tracks that people have to do, where people can contribute. Maybe there could be challenges or there could be contests where people could step up and use skills that others might not know about. And this could also support young people's desire to have an impact, make a difference, contribute beyond what it's written on paper.
Absolutely.
One of the other things we saw was that there is a qualification and an evaluation done on filling the billets or not filling the billets. not necessarily on the quality or the type of person within that. So an adjustment to how the evaluations are done of the people who are actually managing the system, to look at metrics of does the person meet on a score level, the qualifications, how high, how long do they stay in the job, those kinds of qualifications which do exist outside the DoD could be used instead of saying I have 422 billets and I'm evaluated on how many bodies I put into those billet slots.
Yeah. Josh, remind me, which recommendation from our previous recommendations was about the career path? This number, oh, I'm sorry, little quiz for Josh.
That was probably back. So I know we talked about it in recommendation number 1, and I believe it was also possibly been 2, and yeah, make computer science a core competency was number 2, and Ben, what was the other one? Number 15. There you go. See, you always need to phone a friend. Thank you, Ben. That was Ben Bain, leads our Workforce Agriculture Committee, and is a total rock star. 1, 2, and 15. But what I was going to say, Jen, is we are, Eric, reaching the time allotted for this recommendation, and I want to make sure we have a chance to go to the phone line.
Are there any other comments on this, guys?
Can we vote?
Is there further discussion? Shall we go ahead and vote for this one? Yes?
Sure. Yeah.
So how would you like me to do this, Josh?
Well, based on the conversation I just heard, I don't think we need a voice vote on this one. Let me just say, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition?
Okay.
Abstentions? On the phone? Anyone? I think we passed that one.
Okay, sounds like approval to us. Okay, great. Now, Jen, there's another one that you wanted to take us through.
Yeah, so we've just started exploring the department's need for an AI-ready workforce. We're focusing on skill sets, training, and education in this. And we quickly recognized that we could not address artificial intelligence talent with also emphasizing the critical importance of other parts of the enabling environment needed to apply AI to DoD's missions. So in this case, we very much recognize that people are important. Of course, we're the Workforce Behavior Subcommittee, but also so are data, technological infrastructure, and organizational design. So I'm going to speak very briefly to the workforce-related aspects of the recommendation, and then Michael will comment on more of the science aspects of this from the S&T subcommittee. So we make several recommendations related to building an AI-ready workforce, including a call for the establishment of an OSD functional community manager for AI to align efforts across the department. As part of this recommendation, we propose that the Defense Innovation Board endorse the AI workforce model developed by the National Security Commission on AI, which Eric referenced earlier. This will be a very valuable model for DoD leaders so that they can speak the same language and assess their personnel needs sort of across. Another important point I'd like to highlight is the importance of broad AI education across the department. A DoD-wide effort is very much needed to inculcate AI literacy at the appropriate level for each audience. The issue here is that there are broad and persistent misconceptions of what AI is and isn't, what AI can and cannot do, and the DoD really needs to address this. We need much greater awareness at all levels of what AI is really good for, essentially. The DoD should expand immediate access to external training programs while also continuing to develop internal courses at all appropriate DoD education institutions. So that's the workforce side of it. Michael, would you like to pick it up?
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, just want to be able to tie a couple of different themes together here. What you see in the recommendations relates to both the process, but as Jen said, we can, in a good world, and we're trying to get there, we can have all the best people. But if we don't provide the capability and the capacity to actually do the work, we're not going to get to where we need to get to. And so the recommendation makes a strong statement about endorsing the need to look at infrastructure, to look at data, to look at the technology that's behind the way AI will need to be pursued. As we say, even the smartest AI people can't get things done without the tools to get them done. Those of you who have been with us off and on over the last couple of years, you will not be surprised when I reiterate what we have said many times, that data is the lifeblood of any AI or machine learning system, and our ability to treat those as valuable national assets is critical. So recommendations talk through that. I'm also want to just sort of highlight that the recommendations talk about the kind of phased approach that you have heard from this group on many times, especially coming out of the SWAP study. So there's a very iterative approach. There's a 3-phase approach to get to an AI-ready workforce. So, and phase 1 is a pilot program. It's about learning while doing. It's about teaching valuable lessons across the department. But it's also about not getting yourself caught in pilot hell, where all you do is pilots. And so it requires us to continue to evaluate and learn on the pilots. And so doing these things at a statistical enough scale that you can learn trends and capabilities and what works and what will not work. I think there's a role for Jake to lead in the evaluation of those AI pilots, so that's in our recommendations. The pilots then in phase 1 will inform phase 2, the goal of which is to create a real sensible talent pipeline and standardize the processes that we just talked about on the workforce side of how you identify people, how you identify the skills, how you look at moving those people around through the organization. And then in phase 3, to essentially make this owned and responsible at the service components that will then have the demonstrated capability and capacity to apply AI not just to pilots, but to real new ongoing missions that they are responsible for. So ultimately, the goal for all of this is to learn new ways to conceptualize what AI can do, learn new ways to see how we will manage the people in that process, manage, let's say, enable the people and make sure we have the right people with the right tools and the right skills to be able to do the job. And to really learn how to prosper in an environment where systems are abundant, thank you, Milo, and where competition occurs at speeds well beyond where it does today. So, Jen?
Comments?
I like this phased approach, and I like this.
Well, aren't you the one who proposed it?
That's why I like it. So.
We like it too.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to start with pilots, but then to figure out scaling up, because without scaling up, we will not get to the right numbers and the literacy level that you're talking about, Jen.
I think it's really important to recognize that personnel absent the infrastructure and absent the storage for data makes the personnel's job much harder. I really want to emphasize your point of emphasis there, because I think one of the differences, certainly within Google, but most of the companies who are pursuing AI seriously as part of our products, we have a computational infrastructure that we can just lever. We don't have to invent that every time you want to do an AI project. If you have to invent all the infrastructure and then try and figure out a way of collecting data and where to put that in, it becomes a very high cost, long-term effort. So being able to create that infrastructure is going to be critical for being able to have that workforce be able to leverage their skill set.
And to recruit them.
And to recruit them.
Tell them that's
exactly.
there for them when they come in.
Yeah, that's a general problem, right? If you get someone who's a really skilled computer scientist and you give them Windows 7 and SharePoint, well, you know, they're not going to like that.
Does anybody on the phone want to chime in?
We have gotten some feedback that the audio quality is making it a little bit difficult for them.
Okay. Well, they have many things to say, and we'll comment at another time.
It's very difficult for the people on the phone to hear what's being said. I'm wondering if we could try some different microphone arrangement.
Are they on? Yeah, it's on, isn't it?
I think it's the coupling to the bridge.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's definitely on. Danny, it's somewhere between you and us.
I don't think he heard that.
Okay, let's do our best here.
No, I didn't hear that. Maybe somebody, maybe during the break we can play with it and somebody can try dialing in a phone or something.
Okay, we'll try that. Any other comments on this?
If there are no other comments, can we vote on it today?
Yes. Yes?
Yeah?
Okay,
Sure.
so we'll do the same thing as before. Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we'll take that as a yes. Okay?
Sorry
approved.
not to have any to dissensions there.
We're working hard.
We're working hard on
We're
it.
working hard on dissension.
We're coming up with a
All
plan
right.
B for the phone.
Okay, so,
Can I just wrap up then?
yeah, tell us what you're up to next.
All right, so again, on behalf of the Workforce Behavior and Culture Subcommittee, we've got some, we're proud to wrap this up. Again, a big shout out to the team. We have a couple potential projects ahead for us that we'll just preview. One is an assessment of DoD's innovation ecosystem, sort of mapping what's there. Another is best practices for large-scale training and upskilling, and I know the team has been working on this for quite some time, and this would be sort of putting that into overdrive and really bringing something more formal to the table. Another one is an innovation field guide. Two others would be recruiting and retention of tech talent, which is obviously very much part of what we're talking about, and how to better use digital talent within the reserves. You'll notice that one of our stories speaks to somebody who moved into the reserves, and we want to sort of follow up on that as a great resource for this effort. So we're excited about the next few months and really glad to have been able to put this Workforce Now and Campaign for AI-Ready Workforce recommendations on the table today. Thank you.
If I could just quickly interject. So unfortunately, we haven't yet benefited from the fully networked command control and communications recommendation, but it seems like what we can do to adapt is I'll let those on the phone know. If you follow the live stream on our website, the audio is great. And if you text me that you want to talk, we'll be able to pick you up on the phone line.
Okay,
And we're texting that to you in case you just didn't hear
We're
that.
reverting to 1980s technologies. Okay, let's see. I think what we should do is Richard, do you want to take us through
Sure.
where we are on the SWAP study and what you want to amplify?
Yes, so I'll Eric, give you a number of updates on things that we're doing within the Science and Technology Subcommittee that I co-chair with Michael McQuaid. And so, in fact, there are 4 sets of things that we want to talk about. The first, coming back to your original comment about battle networks, is in the area of fully networked command, control, and communications. Then we want to also make some recommendations relative to zero trust architectures. We will do we'd like to put out a new background paper on some things related to SWAP that we'd like to deliberate on and vote on. And then finally, talk about the AI ethics principles activity that we're doing.
And
then a quick update.
can I ask you to define each of these categories for the audience? Some of these are new to the public.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that. So as we kind of walk through these, so the first of these activities that we've been working on is in the area of fully networked command, control, and communications. And as Eric said at the beginning, this is really thinking about as we make use of networks and battle networks, we have to be able to rely on these. They have to have the bandwidth that we need. They have to have the capabilities that we need. And so Milo and Mark are going to take us through some of the work that we've been doing there and a set of recommendations.
Sure. So part of being in the modern digital infrastructures, being able to move data around and moving it around both securely as well as with adequate amounts of bandwidth. We've talked about it before that the department in many ways lives in an environment of comparative poverty for communications and compute. This department is trying to work hard to rectify that. That part of that rectification was tasking to us to go examine the department's state of battle networks, which includes not just the tactical edge, but also the transport out of that region back to other parts of the infrastructure. One of the differences that we find in the department versus sort of the commercial sector is many of the networks, many of the communication links that the department uses and develops are stovepiped. So you've got one system that was built for a particular purpose, you've got another system built for a related purpose. The interconnection and system engineering of how all this is supposed to talk to each other is sort of an afterthought. In many ways, that harkens back to the sort of pre-internet days, right? Where we had individual networks and we just kept replicating systems that were not interconnected and didn't talk to each other well. There are a number of challenges with this. One, it's difficult to get resilience because you have to make that one network be very capable and deal with attacks, deal with outages, without having to be able to take advantage of other communication assets that might be nearby. Another problem with it is, how do you actually think about security in that model? The department tends to think about security from a communication security perspective, as I have a link with encryptors on it, but the data on both sides is unencrypted. The internet and we in the commercial sector have moved to an environment where we protect information. And so that allows you to use different kinds of communication links with different levels of security, because I'm not depending on a communications link to protect my information. That's operating at a higher level of activity. And these networks also need to get much faster because the volume of data coming from sensors, the move to cloud requires a communication network that is capable of supporting the data rates that are required to move data back and forth in and out of the cloud. And, you know, this is part of the problem here is, I remember when I worked for NASA 25 years ago, at that time, the government was the leader in communications and compute R&D. Today, that's really being driven by the commercial sector. So how do you lever commercial technology either in whole or in part to make DoD's communication infrastructure more reliable, more affordable, more capable, and more secure? And that's the part of what we've been talking about. The first set of and by the way, this is not a new problem. I was reminded this trip that in the second offset, where we developed capability for stealth, for precision-guided munitions, there was also the goal of developing a comprehensive communications and command and control network. Now, that part of the second offset did not really materialize, and so it's still a problem today. So part of what we've been working on with the department is, and there's a recommendation in here about trying to move away from these kind of stovepipe infrastructures to more of a platform using network virtualization and software-defined networks where you can lever multiple networks to provide resiliency, to create interoperability between existing legacy systems, today's commercial systems, and tomorrow's networks that are coming online, so that you've got the ability to increase capacity, to assure that communications can happen under stress when parts of the links are going away, and to better take advantage of temporal communications, where I may have a satellite or an airborne relay that may be transiting an area. How do I take advantage of that resource which may not always be there? So we've been working in this area. There's a recommendation in the document about that. And I think talking about, I want to hand it over to Mark to talk about sort of how there's an organizational challenge in the department on this topic as well.
Thank you, Milo. And I think picking up on that thought, there's really two things that we have, after exploring this for quite a while, two things that we want to bring to a greater detail and provide some recommendations on. The first is really the coordination across the department. What we found was that, as Milo was mentioning, the stovepipes, as the word is, but really what it is people and organizations throughout the Defense Department are looking at their problems uniquely within their own worlds and not necessarily looking at it as across the department kind of solution. So the first recommendation that we have as part of this is to assign a responsibility within the department to develop and deploy a DoD network architecture for a coordinated path across all the DoD entities, and to really focus on what, how, and where, and when is the right time to buy commercial solutions. We think that the department should designate a single entity inside the department to synchronize this network commercial product evaluation and acquisition. It doesn't mean that it will happen. What it really means is that right now, the way that the department is looking at it, there's really not a clear path to understanding how to bring a coordinated solution across all the different elements of the department. And I think the second part of this is perhaps even more importantly, and that is to understand what is possible, what is the art of the possible. Within the world that we live in within the department, it is very oftentimes one of blinders. We know what we have, we know what we're working with. The mission oftentimes takes over precedence to trying something new or doing something else. And what we found is that there's truly a lack, not because of lack of effort, but because there perhaps isn't time or there isn't the ability. There truly is a lack of understanding of what is out there, what is the art of the possible. So we think that their recommendation should be that the department stand up a commercial liaison office. And that commercial liaison office could act as a bridge between what is going on within the department and truly understanding what's going on within industry. And that knowledge, just being able to see what the art of the possible is, we think will really enhance the ability to make good buying decisions, good acquisition decisions as we go forward through the process, and good deployment decisions. And what we found is that as we talk to people, that the department is sometimes years behind, in some cases decades behind, where the commercial industry stands. And it's not to say that there's a commercial solution for everything, or even if there is, it should be implemented. But not to know and not to understand is simply not going to move us forward to the level we need to go to. And we think this liaison office should really be a resource so that when somebody is being faced with a potential decision of this level, they have someone to talk to. They have someone to call whose job it is to understand what the art of the possible is exterior to the DoD, and be able to then explain that to the people who are looking to make those buying decisions. And that also means not just standing it up, but maintaining it. Having people go out and understand what the continuing develop is, what's the next generations that are coming in, by attending conferences, by being present in the community, by going out and visiting with the organizations across the scheme that are doing development, so that that knowledge base remains current, remains active, and remains very focused. And by having this liaison office, then people know, and they'll be able to say, this is a place where I can go to get that information. So with that, we'd like to open the floor now for comments on these recommendations. Thank you.
Maybe Mark or Milo, can you talk a little bit about, sort of you have this vision for fully networked and sort of how we bring this all together. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how much has to happen before we pass a critical point? How much of this can be layered in an incremental fashion? Can you maybe say a few words?
Sure. I mean, I think expecting the department to build a brand new system and move everything to it is in one fell swoop is just not practical. There's a ton of existing infrastructure, but it's not interconnected in a way that allows that infrastructure to be leveraged like infrastructure. It's a bunch of different communications facilities, circuits, network node protocols. Sometimes you've got protocol translation that's going to be necessary because, believe it or not, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't speak IP out there. Link 16, for example. And so you go through a lot of very manual processes to move data from one of these kinds of systems to the next. So that's why we think about, can we start with a software-defined network where these different links can be integrated into it, either with gateways or with the ability to turn them into more general purpose links, not devoted to existing stovepipes, and then overlaid with next generation satellite and fiber optic transport to add much more capacity and be able to leverage those resources in the existing applications and services that float over that system.
But Milo, don't you have a significant security issue? Because these systems were not built with proper modern security, so you start interconnecting them even through an SDN, you have to really rethink the security, don't you?
You're right, but part of that is the existing systems are now interconnected in non-official ways in many cases.
That's not encouraging.
So I think the challenge that we see, and this goes back to the next set of conversations about zero trust, is this old model where I've got a perimeter, and as long as I can protect the perimeter, everything on the inside doesn't need to be secure, per se, right? That model doesn't work anymore, not in the current cyber environment that we're in. And I would just say, no corporate CEO could sign off on a Sarbanes-Oxley risk statement with the architecture that DoD has for its communications and security right now. So the question is not that we've got a system that is really secure and now we've got to modernize it and keep security. I think actually moving into this new model actually enhances the ability to secure data and to do it in a much more intentional way.
You know, there's one other interesting thing that came out of this, which was somewhat unexpected, and that goes back to the workforce development question that we talked about earlier. One of the things that we've heard is by not modernizing the tools to at least a level where they're compatible with what's on the outside, the people who are wanting to go into this are not wanting to learn about technology that's 10 years old. And what that's doing is having a chilling effect on some very talented people wanting to join into the world of AI or into the world of networking or broadly speaking into the computer technology world within the department. By concurrently modernizing and moving forward, we get all the benefits of doing that, but we also provide a stronger path to that next generation of workforce who really wants to be working on tools that are current or at least near current and be able to see that there's a path to maintain them going forward to the next level.
Kurt would like to speak. Can we get him connected in some modern way? Kurt, are you there?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, well, great. So the audio, I think that people mentioned is kind of tough, so I'm not 100% whether this topic has come up, but in reading the paper, one of the things I think would be good to layer on is as the DoD moves to public cloud, a lot of the particular implementations that the paper talks about are within the public cloud. And so I think you need to layer on what the impact will be of moving a bunch of the workloads to the cloud and getting better by virtue of that. So that was one observation that I saw.
Yeah, I think.
Well, can we test that thesis, Milo and Mark? Is that actually correct?
If you
are these people capable of moving their stuff to the cloud, or is the technology so backward that they can't do it? Sorry for my prejudice.
Okay. I would say there are efforts right now that are increasingly, and workloads that are running in the cloud, that forces this transition, because if I move my compute outside of that protected perimeter, right, into a different public environment, that perimeter model doesn't work there. So the move to the cloud sort of forces the move to a more zero trust architecture and the ability to lever commercial communications capabilities, because you don't have really bespoke communication links being plugged into these large public infrastructures. I think folks have seen the advantages of being able to move to more elastic compute and to more capability there that they can spin up and spin down instead of have dedicated to them. And I think there are bright spots and there are not so bright spots. But I think that's every corporation that has done this has gone the same way, that there have been things that have worked and there have been things that have been more difficult. But you can't arc, I don't think there's any disagreement about the arc of trajectory of where both the commercial systems and where the department wants to take.
And there really isn't a choice, Eric, in that most of these legacy systems have reached their end of life or not being supported anymore, and people are going to be forced to make this change. So it's really a question of, do you make the change in a planned way, or do you wait until the last few weeks before the exam and cram and try to get everything done? But there's no real third option here of maintaining these systems and continuing most of them for the next decade or so, because it's just not going to work.
I mean, I think if you look at key environments where we've got movements from these old systems, right, to modern, or at least attempting to move to more modern systems, nuclear command and control is one of those areas. We've got tactical networks moving to more IP-based sort of architectures. So I think the department is trying to go down a path to make that work. But at some point, you know, the department spends a lot of money on keeping these old systems around. And at some point, you just have to euthanize them. You know.
That's a technical term.
I think, Milo, we may be ready for a vote on this.
Yes.
Okay, is there further comments from folks on the phone? Kurt, did you get an answer to your question, et cetera?
Yes, I think so.
Oh,
Okay.
we heard you.
Okay, shall we do a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All, All opposed? It's approved. Richard, are you still next?
Yep. So that was the first topic within the S&T subcommittee. The second topic is in the area of zero trust architectures. So in July, we put together a white paper. We presented a white paper and discussed it. Kurt led that conversation about zero trust architectures and zero trust networking, which you've already heard come up in the context of.
And again, just for the benefit of everybody, say the definition again.
Absolutely. So a zero trust architecture assumes that the network perimeter is porous and that the network can be compromised. And so as a result, zero trust architecture is focused on guarding and managing discrete resources and data within that network. So not protecting just at the boundaries and the perimeter, but rather really protecting what's on the inside. Zero trust architectures operate on a least privilege access model. And so what that means is that you assign attribute-based confidence levels to users, devices, resources, and data on the network to better manage their interactions with each other. So you think about what is that object that's out there,
Right.
Who should have access to it, and how do we provide access to the people and devices that need it at the time that they need it, and no one else. And again, in a least privilege access model, you really want to, if you don't explicitly have permission to use that, you don't have access to it.
By default, no, you have no access.
Absolutely, and of course, zero trust, right? And so that sort of fits with that.
Right.
So we had put out a white paper kind of describing that. That's been making its rounds, and people have been discussing it, and I think people say, yes, this is obviously what we need to do in the context of DoD networks. What do we need to do to get there? And so today, we're presenting, and it's on the website, a set of recommendations on what we think we need to do to get there. And those recommendations are in buckets. There are 16 recommendations, but I'll kind of summarize them at a high level. And you can look at the white paper, and of course the board has seen those on the detailed 16. So the first is, of course, to continue to use perimeter security around the network, so we don't want to get rid of that, but acknowledge that network breaches can and will occur. Second is to operate under the least privilege access model, where network users by default don't have access to any applications or services on the network, so that even if an unauthorized user breaks into the network, they should have access to essentially nothing in doing so. The third is to grant access, or third set is to grant access at granular levels depending on the role of the user, so what attributes they should have, including things like the organization, project, and clearance level. And that the attributes should be shared across DoD networks to enable efficient targeted access management. So you think about how you manage this as a system. The fourth set are in the area of multi-factor authentication, and in fact we believe that the DoD should consistently leverage multi-factor authentication as a mechanism of validating identity and access to the network perimeters and to each resource within that network. And finally, we think it's important to monitor the health of the devices being plugged into DoD networks, and to block access for compromised devices and device drive configuration, and to use device drive configuration best practices. So we have a number of more detailed recommendations in terms of how to implement those high level, but that's basically what we've put together. And I think maybe at this point we can just open it up to discussion and questions, and members of the...
One question I have is, what's the... no one would take a very sensitive network and just publish it on the internet with even a zero trust architecture around it. You'd always have a series of layers of protection.
Yeah, I think the question here is where you are on the network, right, is a signal, not a key. So the fact that I'm on base or in a contractor facility is a useful set of knowledge, right, to know whether or not I should give you, whether or not I'm operating in the state and the role that is appropriate. But it doesn't inherently give you any access to information.
It's an indicator, not a guarantee.
A signal, not a key.
So my question is, what's the limit of what you would recommend the DoD do? Clearly, you're not going to put everything on the public network for everyone to see, including our adversaries. That, nobody's going to propose that. But are there things that you would not put into a network because they're so sensitive and you're not unwilling to take even the theoretical risk of contravention?
My view on this is if you just look at the technology that is used today, right, to protect some of the most classified data we have, it's less sophisticated than what Netflix uses to protect Disney movies. That is to say, you have a piece of classified highly classified data goes to a contractor, you have no knowledge of who opens that, right? Whereas if I download a movie off Netflix, I get certain rights. I can potentially cache that, potentially every time I open it, Netflix knows about that. What part of the document I can get at is known. There's this ability to use cryptography and network to maintain fine-grained access control to information. So I would argue that actually you can be much more secure about knowledge by having it be protected with the right combination of encryption and network.
So in the formulation that you all have, the zero trust architecture includes knowing what part is being accessed and all the tracking, revocation, and so forth that an access control system implies.
Yes.
Right? That, in fact, zero trust empowers that to function.
Yeah, and I think you not only want to be monitoring the network and the access to all of those pieces, but you want to be encrypting things both in motion and at rest and all of those other good practices that some are in place, so sometimes that's done, sometimes not, but we think that needs to be done much more uniformly. And again, there is a little bit of a kind of perimeter access model right now.
Sure.
You know, once I have authenticated onto whatever network, I have access to everything on that network at whatever level of classification, and we think that it needs to be much more granular than that, logged, as Milo just said, so that as I access something, that is kept track of, so we really know what's going on.
So my substantive comment is I would say required, not needed. So, for example, encryption at rest and encryption in transit is required in the model you're
absolutely.
designing. It's not optional.
Correct.
Are there other comments?
I'm just wondering, besides the perimeter access, are there other steps towards implementing zero trust architectures?
There are a lot. So, you know, I think commercial industry is figuring this out. So if you look at big corporations, I mean, you know, we all know, you know, just from our own use of multi-factor authentication and other things, but just, you know, what you have access to depends on who you are, what role you're playing, what piece of information you're trying to track. So there are a lot of these things that the commercial technology is there. People are moving to that model. So I think in the commercial world, zero trust is something that people are having to assume. We need to adopt those technologies, make use of them within the context of DoD. It's more than just perimeter access.
Yes, so, but my question was about the DoD.
Right.
So are there efforts, significant efforts to adopt?
I think there are pieces of things going on, but not nearly enough. And I think that, again, it's a huge organization, and so one of the challenges, and we try in our recommendations to lay out how to get started, is to really start moving in that direction as quickly as we can.
I mean, I think there are major efforts going on in some of the services, and certainly in the CIO's office, right, on focusing on this, because it's a key mechanism to help deal with insider threats, right? I think one of the challenges is this notion of role and identity. Ironically, even though we have CAC, that kind of personality is not vended in a way, right, in a consolidated directory or the ability to have information to know who is accessing things. And that's a challenge, right? Because what you want is, if I move out of one particular role, out of one particular job assignment to another one, when my role changes, my access to data should change. So just because I worked on a program a year ago, I should no longer have access rights that were required for that role. Those rights should go away when I transition. That requires the notion of identity that is portable across the department. And in many ways, that can be a real challenge because of the management structures in there. But Kurt's been very involved in this effort. It'd be great to have him say a couple things.
Kurt, can you speak on this?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question. The audio is really tough.
Okay, go ahead, Milo.
Sorry, I was just saying, you've been really deeply involved in this effort. I just want to make sure that you could add any additional commentary.
No, I think the comments are generally good. There are a couple of things I would say. One, I think the movement towards zero trust overall in the industry is only accelerating, and so for the DoD to get on top of it is really critical. The other thing I think that the paper points out is that there are opportunities to launch from pilots and other things that are going on already into, you start slow, you don't start all at one time, right. But we can get into a point where we have early successes and drive that towards a full implementation. I think the idea of having somebody in the DoD, an organization that drives that overall, that takes what's succeeding now and builds on that, and then comes up with the plan for the organization as a whole is really, really key. And having that support for that organization and the efforts that they're driving is critical if you're going to succeed at this as well. But the industry is challenged in doing it just as much as the DoD will be. But what comes out of it and the improvement in the security posture that comes from this approach is just huge. And so there's a huge urgency around doing it.
I'd also just like to this is Danny Hillis, I'd just like to pile on a couple of other comments. One is that this is a rapidly changing area, so I think we would need to see it as a dynamic problem. Track it and follow it and develop it. And then the second thing that I think is important is that this also has the potential of really speeding up the software deployment process, because an awful lot of that is slowed down by the qualification process that we have to put things through right now, because we don't operate in a zero trust mode.
So I would just add one more thing. On the academic side, there has been very rapid progress in what homomorphic encryption can achieve, computing on data without decrypting. And I'm very encouraged by how quickly the algorithms are progressing. So in the near future, we hope we can have realistic homomorphic encryption systems.
Yeah, you make a really important point, and one that we often make in our conversations with the department. Crypto, like software, ages badly. The department needs to be able to move to better, more secure ciphers, quantum-resistant key exchanges, and other sets of capabilities. Once you go down this path, and the department's already down this path, you have to be able to update things relatively quickly on the encryption side. That's what industry is doing, and I think we have to be thoughtful about that we're changing out our cryptographic infrastructure every few years, because what used to be secure isn't, because of advances in compute.
Are there other comments and other people on the phone who'd like to make comments? Okay, we'll take that as we're good. Any more comments? Would you like to vote on this one as well?
Yes, we'd like to.
Okay, we have to vote on this one as well. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're getting practiced at this. Anyone opposed? Okay, we'll take that as a yes. Richard, you're
Great.
still on.
I'm still on. All right, so the third area that we'd like to talk about is an elaboration on some of the work coming out of our software acquisition and processes report. The SWAP report was something that was mandated by Congress, and we delivered to Congress and DoD a set of recommendations on what to do to improve acquisition of software and the practices by which software is produced. And we did that on May 3rd is when we formally delivered it, or it was delivered by the department to Congress. And one of the more controversial recommendations in there was recommendation D1, in which we said that DoD should require access to source code, software frameworks, and development tool chains with appropriate IP rights for DoD-specific code, enabling full security testing and rebuilding of binaries from source. And the reason that we made that recommendation is, very much consistent, I think, with some of the zero trust decisions, which is that we really do need to make sure that the software is secure. And doing that without access to source code is very difficult to do. Access to source code allows that in a much better way. And if you are developing DoD-specific source code, that is, DoD is paying for the development of that source code, we believe that that should be a deliverable as part of the delivery on that project. This has generated a lot of discussion in industry and within the government. And in some cases, it's been interpreted to mean that DoD should only acquire software if it comes with source code rights. And that's not quite what we said. And so we thought that it was important that we elaborate a little bit and to make clear what we said. And so we have put together a background paper that pulls together what we said so that instead of sort of spread out across the report, we pull it into one place. And then to kind of make some additional remarks around that to try and describe why it's important and in addition, how we thought about it. So we do still very much believe that every purpose-built DoD software system should include source code as a deliverable. And in fact, that was one of our 10 commandments of software that we put out very early in the swap process. At the same time, whenever possible, DoD should use existing commercial software to solve problems that are common between DoD and commercial uses. So if we're solving a problem that is not specific to the DoD, then using commercial software rather than rewriting it makes a huge amount of sense. And we believe that DoD should in fact modify its processes to better match the processes that are going on in the commercial industry, because it's just much more efficient to do it that way. Then you can take advantage of the scale, maturity, speed, and often security of commercial software. So easy examples are things like word processing and travel planning and inventory and audit that every big organization has to do. And there's no reason that DoD needs to write its own software or contract out to have its own software written in order to satisfy those common functions. But it is something that DoD sometimes tries to do because they say, well, but we're different. And we think, in fact, that they should often become more the same. And so our recommendations reflected that. At the same time, so every purpose-built DoD software system should come with access to source code. Whenever possible, use existing commercial software solutions does not mean that for commercial software solutions, source code must be provided. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. All software is not the same, and so you have to think about where is that software being used. So we believe that whenever it's feasible and useful, DoD should indeed seek to obtain source code for non-custom software for the purposes of vulnerability scanning and related analysis. Again, if it's being used in certain situations, you really do want to make sure, and it may be used in different situations than it's used in commercial industry, and so you have to think about that. And so we just want to make clear, I think, to the department that as it goes forward, it's not this or that and it's binary, but rather it has to be thought about in terms of how it's being used. We also believe that in many situations, it's likely that commercial code that is widely deployed is going to be less vulnerable than DoD-specific code for serving some of those common functions because it's widely deployed and it's getting attacked essentially all the time and it's getting fixed and corrected and updated quickly and all of the good things that you want. So we have, in the background paper that we've put together, we've tried to pull out some of these pieces, and where we've seen things where there might have been some inconsistent language in the way that we said things, we've tried to be a little bit more clear about that. But again, whenever possible, DoD should use existing commercial software to solve problems that are common between DoD and commercial uses. Whenever feasible and useful, DoD should seek to obtain source code for non-custom software, and every purpose-built DoD software system should include source code as deliverable. So we've put together this background paper. We'd like to have a little bit of deliberation on that and then agree to adopt that as a kind of enhancement, I suppose, to the recommendation that we've already made in the swap report.
Questions or comments on this?
I'll just say I think it's a very important clarification. One of the things I was, proud to be a small part of this study, because one of the important things that it said, which seemed kind of radical, is that where there exists commercial software, DoD should adopt the processes to allow industry standard practices. In other words, adapt your processes, don't build custom software. And I think that could have so much benefit to the department, and if the lack of clarification earlier around source code was keeping that from moving forward, I think this is a really, really important clarification.
Yeah. I would also just add, I would be very suspicious of any package that hasn't ever had a CVE found, right?
I hope it's out, CVE.
Sorry, an exploit or a bug that was a security hole discovered. That means if there's a commercial package and no one has ever found a software bug that was a security issue with it or operating system, that means like nobody's looking at it. You want to be running code that people are looking at, that people are poking at, that people are prodding. And I should put in the comment that open source is sort of the hybrid layer here, right? Where I can run on top of an open source operating system where I've got total visibility, where people are pushing on it, beating on it all the time. When you find bugs, that's a good thing, right? That should give you confidence that in the code. Whereas if you've got a piece of code that nobody is ever looking at, nobody is trying to push on, there's never been a bug found, that I would grab my wallet. I would, be really concerned about that. And I would definitely want source code for that, so that NSA or another group could actually do the penetration testing analysis on it.
Can I just also ask the authors of the report to remind us, it's not just security that we want the source code for, right?
Right. So I think another aspect of this is that often you need to move things to a new platform, and being able to transition things over to a new environment requires often recompiling it or being able to run it on the latest version of an operating system or other things. And so just having that ability to move code around, move it to new platforms, not only look for vulnerabilities, but also keep it up to date in the best possible way. Yeah.
Well, keep it up to date, but also keep it functionally up to
Absolutely.
date. Right. So if you build your own thing, you're going to be confined
Yes.
to
Software
those,
does not age gracefully, so
yeah.
it really be careful.
That sounds like we're in wild agreement. Are there other comments on this, Michael?
No, it's fine.
Comments on the phone? This seems like an enhancement, clarification, whatever. It seems like a definitely good thing to do. Do we have a vote on this?
Yes, please.
Okay, voting in favor?
Aye.
Anyone voting
Aye.
against? Anyone voting against? Okay, so that's a yes. Richard, you're still on.
All right, but I'm going to hand it over now to Michael McQuaid to talk about our AI ethics principles report and recommendations.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everybody. And the crew over here, you're going to have to do the telepromptering since I can't see what's going on here. And I'm probably going to randomly go through all this, so figure out which slide I'm talking about. No, I don't want to do the clicker. So, no. Okay, so we're going to talk about the effort on AI ethics principles. I will start at the beginning by thanking an enormous number of people for this process. Just to remind everybody, this is sort of a 15-month thing that we have been under. 3 things happened last summer. One was the newly published AI strategy, made a specific reference around leading in AI ethics and safety. The Joint AI Center was stood up, including the responsibility and activity in the Joint AI Center around ethics. And we were tasked by the Secretary to put together a process to deliver a set of information and a set of potentially recommended principles on what AI ethics should mean for the department. Eric mentioned it before, I'll mention it at least once more. We are a federal advisory committee. Our job is not to write the ethics principles for the department. It was to engage a very broad community and to recommend what those principles might be. When we're all said and done, the adoption of any principles needs to be the responsibility of the Secretary and the department. Having said that, we have had enormous cooperation across the board. And I will tell you that it is very heartening to see a department in particular that has taken this as seriously as it has. First of all, because of the impact on mission, but second, because it is an opportunity to lead. It's an opportunity to lead a global dialogue founded in the basics of who we are and how we operate as a country and as a department, and where we go from there. So did I get enough context for you there? I think so. So let's go to the next slide. So question is, why should the department be looking at ethics? First of all, it should support the DoD's commitment to an ethical AI strategy. We need to provide clarity. We do need to provide clarity to people who will use these systems, and we need to provide clarity to the public so that they understand how, when, why, and where the department will use AI in the world as we go forward. We want to create a starting point that ultimately should lead to a coherent and collaborative dialogue with our allies and our partners around the world to help shape global norms. There's been a lot of work in this area. The U.S. has signed on to certain OECD principles, but it becomes functionalized in the military. It becomes functionalized in the department, and we need to be engaged with our partners in ensuring that the values that we all collectively represent show up in the principles that govern how we work. And finally, we need to demonstrate that the DoD takes the use of AI responsibly, takes the use of AI as it would with any other technology responsibly. So, next slide. 15 months ago, we started the project. We had 2 public listening sessions, 4 total public sessions altogether. Over 100 stakeholders participated in those interviews. For those of you in the audience, you will recognize this is a subject for which there are a very wide range of opinions, a very wide range of fact patterns that people use. They were all a part of this process. We saw people from very far on one side to very far on the other side about what is an ethical use of AI, up to and including people who believe that there is no ethical use of AI. So there was a very, very broad set of interviews. Over 200 people submitted comments to us. There was a group formed in the department, a working group to look at how any decisions we would reach, any recommendations we would reach could impact the operation of the department. That group met a dozen times. We had 2, I'll use the word red team exercises in the department to look at how a potential recommendation or a potential ethics principle might support or impede a mission in some way, shape, or form. So this is a very active dialogue that occurred.
And Mike, those were done throughout the country, is that correct?
That's correct. The listening sessions, the public sessions were on the, one was in Boston, one was in Pittsburgh, and 2 were in the West Coast in the Bay Area. So yeah, thanks, good reminder. The outcome of that, which you will see later when they get posted on the website, there are 2 documents. One is, for want of a better word, the so-called short form document. It is about a 5-page document that recites the background and the principles and a set of recommendations we are delivering as to how the department should take whatever principles it has forward. There is also an extraordinarily important supporting document. Those 2 documents, if we've done our job right, are completely coherent with one another, but that supporting document contains a tremendous amount of background information on what are the underlying principles and foundations that have always guided the department, what are the unique issues that AI presents. I'll speak about those in just a moment. What does it mean for us in the way we think about test and evaluation? There's some very, very important information in that supporting document that I recommend highly. And what we will, if we get to a vote today in our dialogue, we will vote on the approval of both of those documents as a pair. So next page. Make sure I'm on the right one. Yes. So you have to start this conversation with 2 fundamental questions. So number 1, do we have to create an ethical framework in general? The answer to that is no. This is a department and a country that operates on an ethical framework that informs how the Department of Defense operates. Those start from the basic laws of the land, the Constitution, and the body of law that's evolved from that. They include the U.S. Code, the Title 10 codes. They include international norms and the international law of war to which we ascribe or subscribe, international treaties. They also rest very heavily on well-articulated, well-trained, and well-communicated doctrines and policies and norms and values that the DoD and the services communicate to every person. So we are not starting from an unfertile ground here. We also have, there's a piece of technology. There's a lot of stuff that wraps around AI. It is a piece of technology, and it's a department that has a profound history of the development of complex technology that does hard and dangerous things. And I would not suggest we should be having a conversation about AI without that experience and capability to have done hard things in the past, to have developed cultures of safety, cultures of complex operation. So there's a very strong grounding point there. And all ethics principles that we would offer need to leverage this basic foundation. So that was our starting point. We then have a conversation about what makes AI different. And I will say we bounded this entire project not to re-adjudicate technology in general, not to create a new ethical foundation for the department, but our task was to say, what does AI create as something new, if anything, in that conversation? It could have been a possible outcome that when we were all said and done, we said, there's nothing new that AI brings to the party, just go back to what was on the previous slide and reaffirm a commitment to those and continue to do what we do. We did not find that to be the case. There are certain things about AI that we do believe represent fundamental differences to just another piece of technology. They relate to the potential for augmenting or replacing human judgment. They relate to the different ways we will need to assure, to the extent we best can, and in a responsible fashion, safety of our systems. They relate in a lot of ways to the role that the private sector has in both the development of AI as a technology base and in the data that is used to inform, train, and deploy our AI systems. They also relate significantly, or they also provide a new framework around biases that could be introduced into a system because of the unique nature of AI, whether that is in the algorithms themselves or whether that is in the data. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. So we do believe that there is something different about AI. We arrived at 5 principles, and the shorthand version of those principles are the DoD's goal for its AI activities should be that they be responsible, that they be equitable, that they be traceable, that they be reliable, and that they be governable. And I'll just give a brief description of each of those as we go forward. So those are the 5 principles that we are recommending as principles that the DoD should consider adopting for its use of AI. The first question, or the first principle, is responsible. It's a firm statement that human beings exercise appropriate levels of judgment and remain responsible for the development, deployment, use, and outcomes of DoD AI systems. That does not say that the soldier at the end of the pointy end of the spear has the same responsibility as the person whose job it is to design, develop, and deploy the system. We move responsibility around in the department now with weapon systems. We move responsibility for non-combat systems. But we do believe that it is a firm principle that humans remain responsible for the development, deployment, and use and outcomes of AI. The humans are subject to the legal requirements that I talked about in our ethical framework. Machines do not have agency. They do not have legal responsibility. So it's important for us to recognize that humans ultimately maintain that responsibility. The second principle is equitable. DoD should take deliberate steps to avoid unintended bias in the development and deployment of combat or non-combat AI systems that would inadvertently cause harm or harm to persons. You may see resonances of the word fairness in here. I will caution you that in many cases the Department of Defense should not be fair. It does not plan to come to a fight and be fair. What's at operation in this principle is that unintended unfairness, unintended bias are what we are trying to make sure we point out here. You can think about that in non-combat systems. What happens if an AI in my personnel management system has an unfair bias either in its algorithmic integrity or in the data that is used? And it should be a firm principle that our goal is to not have unintended bias in our systems. So that's the second of the our principles we recommend. The third is the principle of traceable. This one speaks to our engineering discipline. Our engineering discipline should be sufficiently advanced such that technical experts possess an appropriate understanding of the technology, the development processes, and the operational methods of the systems, including transparent and auditable methodologies of the methodologies, the data sources, the design procedures, and the documentation. What does that all mean? That means that we intend that there should be a clear ability to understand how we got to where we got to on the system. That does not mean that we need to, in real time, be able to trace every modification of a weight on a machine learning system, but it does mean that our methodologies and our decisions around the development of the technology and the system should be at the appropriate level. The fourth is a principle of reliability. DoD systems AI systems should have an explicit, well-defined domain of use. We design for a purpose. The safety, security, and robustness of such systems should be tested and assured across the entire life cycle within that domain of use. By assurance here, we do not want to convey that we believe that, unlike any other system in the world, that you should be able to 100% guarantee fail-safe behavior at all times. We at one point had words like fail-safe in the conversation. Fail-safe can imply not accepting ever failure. We live in a world that is more complicated than that. in the current systems we use, we allow a risk-based evaluation of how much safety we, not how much, a risk-based evaluation of the consequences of our systems. And we believe that our AI systems should be in the same category. They should be tested, and that you'll see in our recommendations, the ability to test and evaluate AI systems represents a new challenge to us because of new tools, new techniques, and we have some strong recommendations in addition to the principles around the work that has to be done in creating those new T&E methods for AI systems. And our final principle is governable. AI systems should be designed and engineered to fulfill their intended function, this is a very important principle for us, while possessing the ability to detect and avoid unintended harm and disruption. Remember, in a combat situation, they are designed to create harm and disruption. They should be designed to detect and avoid unintended harm or disruption. They also should be designed to be able to be disengaged and deactivate deployed systems that demonstrate unintended escalatory or other behavior in the field. The concern here is what happens if a system not fails to function. We deploy systems all the time that potentially can fail for a reason. The issue that we're bringing to light here is what happens if a system in the field begins to demonstrate behavior that was not the intended behavior. And we believe that it's important to recognize that a principle should allow us to be able to disengage and deactivate that behavior. So those are our 5 principles. In addition to that, so for next steps, what happens is we'll have a discussion and conversation here. You'll get a lot of feedback from the team. This has been a very active conversation across the DIB and across the country. We'll vote on those today. The report then gets transmitted to DoD leadership to review, and the DoD will decide on its next steps. Those next steps will ultimately lead to a decision on what principles, if any, it wants to espouse and how it will deploy those. I would simply say that this effort is also important for some of the other things you heard today around the AI-ready workforce. We have also made a series of 12 recommendations in support of our process. So while the DoD will decide what to do with the ethical principles, we have 12 recommendations. I'm not going to talk through all of those. They're in the report. I would encourage you to look at those. I want to highlight 4 very quickly. One is that the DoD should formalize its response to this study and recommendations, and it should formalize how it will proceed with its process and communicate what it is going to do about AI ethics. That will include potentially issuances on either policy, principles, et cetera. Number 3 is to cultivate and continue to grow the field of AI engineering. It is a rapidly evolving discipline. There's investments that need to be made in the underlying technology, but there's significant investments that need to be made in the way you engineer these systems, test, evaluate, et cetera, and deploy those systems. Number 9, to develop a risk management methodology. It is important that we get our language right and that we understand what the level of risk is in the systems that we deploy, what the consequences of those risks are. I'll harken back to the SWAP study. Not all software is the same, and we need to treat software contextually, so a series of work there. And finally, number 12, we endeavored to create a set of recommended principles that are not just for today and that they should disappear tomorrow. I would not use, however, the word timeless. It is an evolving field. It has been a very important exercise to engage the broad community, and we believe that the department should continue in its convening and discussing and engaging with the public, both inside the department and outside, to continue to understand how the field and how the ethical issues surrounding the field continue to evolve. With that, I have just 10 seconds where I want to recognize 4 people. Aaron Schubacher, who's standing right there. All of you who have ever done this kind of work realize at the end of the day, there is a staff member who gets it all done. So Aaron has been indefatigable in his efforts to get us to a place where we could all talk about what we're talking about today. Matt Daniels and Greg Allen. Matt Daniels as the AD for AI ML in R&E, and Greg Allen in the Army, in Jake as technical advisor in Jake, have been instrumental in helping all of us understand how, when, and where this will be impactful and impacted in the department. And finally, Heather Roth from Johns Hopkins, who was an SGE with us for over a year on this project, and has been instrumental in making sure the grounding and foundation around both how the department operates now and what AI brings from an ethical point of view. So I just want to recognize those 4 people before I open it up to discussion.
Well, Michael, can I say that this is an extraordinary piece of work by you and the team. If you read it when you get a copy, you'll see the list of all the people who were part of the meetings by name. You'll see quite a bit of the details of the process that was come to. You'll see technical matters that define this. I think it's important that we have a proper discussion about this. Danny Hillis, are you on the phone, and have you heard this conversation so far?
Yes, I am.
Can you
apologize.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the recommendation, so I'm going to ask actually if Michael could put back the governable slide up on the screen, because I think that my comments are primarily about that. I mean, having built a lot of these artificial intelligence systems, I think this is the most problematical aspect about them, because they're capable of exhibiting and evolving forms of behavior that are very difficult for the designer to predict. And sometimes those forms of behavior are actually kind of self-preserving forms of behavior that can get a bit out of sync with the intent and goals of the designer. So I think this is actually one of the most dangerous potential aspects about them. And I've had experience of trying to govern these systems and having them discover very tricky ways around the rules I try to put on them, including like exploiting round-off errors in the floating point unit and things like that, things I never would have imagined to get around the ways I try to govern them. So I feel like there's a principle that is not really clearly stated here that needs to be very explicitly stated, which is that all DoD AI systems should have a reliable means for deactivation by a human if it's required. In other words, they should have an off switch. It's a very reliable off switch. And the reason AI systems need this more than other systems is because they can do much more surprising things, including try to prevent you from turning them off. So I think this is a very important principle that needs to be stated very clearly, and I don't feel like it's stated clearly in this statement of governable. So either I think it needs to be a different, an added principle, which it was in some earlier drafts, or this statement needs to be modified to incorporate that notion of an off switch.
Okay. Did you have other comments besides that? We'll return to that one. We'll call this the off switch question. Okay. So are there other comments on I want to come back to this off switch question. Are there other comments as well?
Well, so I guess I'll just say, not directly on the off switch question, but just on some of the other things. Michael said this, but I guess I'd just like to reemphasize it, because I think it was one of the things I kind of learned as we went through the process, that the services in DoD generally already have a set of ethical principles that govern what we do in the context of the department's activities. And that includes not just the things we do, and I think it's important, you know, when we are projecting force and defending territory, but also just within the department's everyday operations. And AI is going to apply across all of that. So really to all of the operations the department does. And I was impressed, I think, with understanding more about the ethics that the services expect of all members of the military and civilian workforce that apply across all of those activities. And I think this builds on that, as Michael said, in terms of thinking about what's different about AI. But I think it's important to recognize, because we heard this a lot in the public comments, and you know, that people are against the use of AI, and really I think against the use of force. And the U.S., I think, is a leader in its moral and ethical values in how it defends itself against people who want to hurt us. And this builds on that, and I think it's just important to recognize that those ethical principles are very strong within the department and indeed within the United States. I mean, that is part of the Constitution and the other things and being a democracy. And we wish that everybody would adopt those sort of ethical principles around the world, but they don't, and we do find ourselves often in the position where we have to defend ourselves or defend our interests. But we do so in an ethical way, and so I think that's kind of important to keep in mind. And again, as we went through and talked with the military and talked with people about it, that was something that kind of struck me that I hadn't thought about quite in the same way.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about the report is it mentions that many other countries have similar patterned documents, but the details differ a great deal.
Right.
Right. So the devil is in the details in this case.
I think it's also in the differences in the nature of the systems and how they're required, and what our training tactics and practice procedures are, TTPs, because that's really where the tire sort of meets the road, right? It's really important on how we use these systems. I would add something on the governability issue. You know, my view about, I think, I'm less concerned about Danny's concern, because I think that the ability to deactivate the system is mentioned here. But there is this notion of what does it mean to actually be governable, right, in terms of limitation of scope. So you could imagine a situation where, an example I was thinking of, not in the defense context, but let's say you have 3 companies in a commodities business, all the products are exactly the same, they all have large market shares. I decide to build a reinforcement learning driven ML model to optimize for profit, okay? It's not, and all of them decide to do this. It's not unreasonable to think that in the process of optimizing for profit, the algorithms would result in signaling that would be the equivalent of price fixing. Then the question is, how do you stop that? You can't, there's no intent in a system like this, right? What is the controls that you would say, how do I prevent these systems from doing something illegal? That's not, you know, it's not clear that you could put in a particular limit that the algorithm would not adapt to as part of its reinforcement
But corporations have the same problem. You
Yes.
have a rogue employee
Yes.
that illegally
Totally right.
does price fixing with their competitor. You have to, under the law, you end up firing both, and then both
Right.
are subject to criminal penalties.
And that goes back to agency.
That's right.
That's right.
But going back to the AI systems, it's important to understand what they can and cannot do, and what the safe and trustworthy scope of using these systems is, because the technology is still very much under development. It's changing every day, so investment in pushing this change forward so we can get better foundations, more trustworthy behavior is important. And this has to be considered as we think about what to do in order to ensure the consumer, whoever the consumer is, confidence in a decision supported by an AI system. And actually, this brings me to a point that is mentioned in the report about how AI is not autonomy. And I wonder,
Yes.
Michael, if you would like to expand a little bit on the interdependencies between AI, autonomy, and augmentation, and what we actually mean by AI, sure. Because AI has become a word that means many different things to different people.
Yeah, it's a good question. Milo, do you want to start? And then I'll.
No, go ahead.
No?
You
Okay,
start.
very good. So it's a great question. So we try and make a very clear distinction that those two terms are not the same thing. That an autonomous system is in some sense a system that can potentially operate with a set of rules. Those set of rules.
I think there's a line, and I think that line should not be crossed. And because it would violate this notion of a human in the loop, human control, human responsibility. As you pointed out, software doesn't have agency.
Right.
You know, our systems require humans to be responsible for these decisions. So you can imagine an autonomous system that made decisions after the button is pushed, right? Where's the line? Let's assume you press the button and the direction is some horrific goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the limit? What if it learns along the way? What are the rules?
I think, I think a couple of things, and I'll get to an answer, but we deploy things that do nasty things all the time.
Yeah.
The question ultimately comes back to not a bright line that we can define. It comes back to the question of how much the system evolves over time. And I think that's if you look at the autonomy regs and principles in 3000.09, they relate to our ability to have tested the system to assure that once deployed in the field, we will accept the level of risk that it will perform as intended. That's a different statement, and the line that I would argue that shows up in this report is that when a system that is deployed in the field that can evolve in the field, that represents a different line. That's the AI question.
I'm not sure that would be the case, for me at least. I think I think the issue is one scope. If I'm talking about a standoff missile that's designed to attack a radar emitter, right? There's a certain scope that system is operating. It's going to be used in a wartime context. Typically, you would put some sort of geofence around the authority that system operates in. I think it becomes much more complicated when you go into a domain like cyber, where you don't have the ability to sort of limit scope in the same way that we do in the physical world, and where you may have interlinked systems which may end up having consequences that are not as easily understood. I think in the cyber domain is where the department will face more of these sort of complex questions.
Part of this is not only the governance in terms of the execution of the order to move, but once that order is given, is it possible to alter, kill, or change until the point of the final conclusion of whatever it is that system is doing?
Yeah. What I was going to say is I'm concerned that the button is, I'm using metaphors here, the button is pressed and there's some time during which very complicated decisions are made and learning occurs that may be unanticipated from the standpoint of, in other words, the human says, well, I pressed the button and, oh my God, look what happened.
Right, it goes in the wrong direction and we want to stop it.
So let me say two things, because I think it leads to Danny's question.
Yeah, and I want to get back to Danny's question.
I mean, I think we live in a world today where we initiate an action, and there are times when we want to be able to call that action back. Sometimes we can and sometimes we cannot, but we try very hard to have that ability to abort up to the time when we can't. So that exists today. The bigger issue is the one that is, and I'll just say that could be because we just decided to change our mind, right? The bigger issue is the one, Eric, that you bring up and that Danny is raising, which is what happens when the system, after I have deployed in the field, begins to do something that it was not intended to do. So I think Danny's concern is a correct concern.
So what is your answer to his query?
Our answer is I think the principle covers it because it says disengage and deactivate deployed systems that demonstrate unintended escalatory or other behavior. So
let's ask Danny, are you listening and can you comment on this? Okay, we're working on connecting to Danny. Okay. Okay. Let's continue then.
The other thing that I guess I had a question on is it doesn't reference any gradation of these decisions in terms of the governance factor. How would you comment to that? There certainly are different decisions that require different levels.
Or not. Danny, are you there?
There's a short delay. He's coming.
Okay. So Mark, I think we tried.
People in the future, I don't think there should be any ambiguity about it. I think that we should say that it needs a reliable way of deactivating, of a human deactivating the system. So I just think the wording is unclear. My suggested wording was, DoD AI systems should have a reliable means for deactivation by a human if required.
Yeah, I guess the question in my mind is, I think we agree on the principle that it needs to be deactivated or disengaged. I would like to, I want to be careful that we might envision a possibility where humans cannot act fast enough to disengage.
I would definitely agree with that. And again, going back to the cyber domain, right? You may have another AI system that is actually acting as the supervisor, right? To looking and making sure that different systems are in compliance. I think actually requiring a human to turn it off is actually more limiting.
Presumably that's not what Danny was talking about. Go ahead.
I'm not saying that's the only way of deactivating it. I think it's fine if we have automatic systems to deactivate them. But I think that a principle for the current state of the art, until we understand better ways of governing these things, is that it should always be possible for a human to deactivate. It should always have an off switch until we get better at being able to predict the behavior of these things. That ultimately we have to trust in the human. That doesn't mean we can't also have automatic.
Are you all comfortable with language which says automatic or human deactivation?
Well, I just wonder because the level of comfort really depends on what the system does.
I agree.
Right. So we would be having a machine make a decision could be okay in some cases, but I don't think we want to relinquish to machines in all cases.
Not in all cases, but I don't think we want to have to rely on a human in all cases.
Come on, guys, we can come up with a sentence that covers these cases.
I think the sentence already covers it, but I'm trying to understand Danny, why you think that the existing more general text does not cover the specific subset. Because there's a bunch of things in the actual text that get more specific about human agency of the operation.
Why don't we read that paragraph then?
Yeah.
It's on
page 40.
Yep.
Architecture designed for safe interruptibility, isolation, and self-monitoring are also vital, et cetera, et cetera. AI systems may work with little human supervision. Humans cannot always be in the loop at all times. Okay, go to the next paragraph. System architecture should be designed where appropriate to permit safe interruptibility. For complex systems and system of systems engineering for isolation or graceful failure is prudent. Let's see. Recent work on safe so I mean, I think that's the core wording here.
But come on, guys. It just seems like we can get a stronger statement here. The principle here is human or automatic interruption in the case of either violation of values, human concern, decision-making, what have you. There must be a way to insert a sentence that addresses this in the document, clearly.
Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, I happen to think the wording covers it, but if we want to say human or other automatic ability, that's okay.
So my proposal is some variant of the systems must include human control, or in the cases where that's not fast enough, automatic control in the case of a violation of norms or what have you. Somebody can come up with the right wordsmithing. I want to reflect the Milo and you guys are in agreement, actually.
Yeah.
Right. So, Danny, are you able to do you have some language that would work? Okay, here we go. Okay, we're working on it. Sorry, guys.
Real-time deliberation.
I understand. Danny wants the word human.
Okay. Let's go back to the general debate, and I think we can come up with a sentence that will address this. Are there other concerns besides, I'm going to call the off-button concern?
I understand.
I think there was an excellent comment earlier about making sure that in the recommendations we are talking about the impact on the warfighter and studying what psychological impacts folks who are interacting with these systems might have.
We do talk about that. Right?
Yeah.
We say that the
I think we
warfighter
can
has to
come
be.
up with a sentence that will address this. Are there other concerns besides I want to call the off-button concern?
Sorry, we're
AI
having
taking
audio
over.
trouble. But my suggestion is since the governability thing already describes, I believe the
We are talking about the impact.
automatic deactivation, that we add a sentence just specifically talking about that it should also always have human deactivation.
Might have.
Okay, so, Michael, what is your?
Say it again, Danny?
Josh, how would you like to handle this? What is your judgment?
Give me a second.
I think quite a lot of detailed attention went into the selection of every word in the 32 drafts, and that we should make a note of the specific language that Danny is recommending, but I don't think that this prevents the board from voting on the language as it is. I also will ask him to text me rather than try to say over the line the language he wants, which may help us get to an answer faster.
I'm sorry, we're dealing with a 20-second delay here. So when you say it again, I will only say it again 20 seconds later. But I suggest that we just add an additional sentence. I believe the current statement already covers the notion of automatic deactivation, which I think is good, and sometimes that will be necessary. But I think whether it's automatic is there or not, there needs to be ability to have human deactivation. So I think we should add a sentence saying specifically that all DoD AI systems should have a reliable means for deactivation by a human if required.
So Michael's response?
Danny, how about if I'm not sure you can hear me, so let me suggest the following. Unintended harm or disruption and for human or automatic ability to disengage or deactivate.
Right.
I am not in favor of a principle that demands that humans be the only source to be able to disengage.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm either going to suggest we stay with the wording as is, or we add for human or automatic ability to disengage.
Okay, so let's wait for Danny's 20 seconds to answer.
You know, YouTube doesn't have the same delay in it.
Milo. This is good. It
We're
gives
off
us
to
time
Pluto
think.
and back.
This is good. I mean, this is a good debate.
Round trip time.
Hold on.
It would not be an exciting conclusion to a 15-month process without a little suspense.
This is your government at work.
This is worse than going to geo orbit and back.
Okay. Are there any other issues besides this issue? So we're ready to approve this subject to this one wording question.
So Danny, if you can hear, Michael is putting in the exact wording and sending it to you. Just stand by a moment.
Okay, so my proposal is some variant of authentic, automatic, or human in this paragraph. I think that's I think, a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, so, all right, Danny said yes.
Okay, so
the reading
read what
is-
he said yes to.
All right. Avoid unintended harm or disruption and for, what do I got here? And for human or automatic disengagement or deactivation
Okay, that seems
of deployed systems.
okay. That seems excellent.
Does that work?
All right.
I propose we all agree to this.
and we change what.
Milo?
No, let's go for it.
Okay.
You good?
Are there other comments from anyone else who can hear us? And thank you, Danny, for pushing this forward. Okay. Are we ready to vote then, Josh?
Josh?
Well, let me ask you this. So do you want to vote on the change, or do you think that there's 100% agreement on the edit as described?
Okay. Can everyone who hears me say that they agree with this proposed edit? We know Danny does.
So we're voting just on the proposed
Just on the edit.
So the first question is the proposed edit. Is everyone here that can hear me say yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and Danny said yes.
Well,
Via text.
we need others on the phone, so.
Are there other people on the phone who can hear us?
Is there any opposition to the amendment? Okay.
I would
so-
just propose we vote on both with the wording modified as we just talked about.
Yeah,
Right,
so my proposal is let's make this one sentence modification and then vote to approve the report and its transfer. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and vote. Who is in favor of sending it with the modified sentence?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Myself?
Okay. Opposition? Abstentions?
Okay.
Approved as amended. Thank you.
Approved with the one sentence modification. And thank you all for your patience with old technology.
There are other people on the phone who can hear us.
Is there any opposition to the amendment?
My vote's yes.
Good.
Good.
Good?
Thank you. Thank you. That was Dan.
You guys should also thank NASA for the use of their deep space network to move this.
Okay, it's going to Jupiter
You're the reason
and
we have
coming
the
back.
delay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Michael.
so thank you all for watching sausage making. This is actually what's exactly supposed to happen. And I would make two comments. One, it's an enormously important area for us. It will evolve over time, as Danielle has said, but I think getting it as right as we can right now is the right thing to do. Danny, thanks for helping us and for everybody that has participated in all this.
Okay, so with that, Josh, are we done with our little section and then you have a presentation? Is that how this works?
Yes.
Okay, Josh has a presentation.
Great. We're pulling that up. And I get a slide. Believe it or not, we seem to have lost the Wi-Fi as well. So, I'm going to do a very abbreviated version of this presentation because I want to make sure we do have some time for comments. But I just wanted to say that federal advisory committees provide advice to senior leaders, but they don't have the authority to implement. But one of the things that the department always does is present back to the board members the things the department has done with this. So one of the things we wanted to share with you is some examples of some recent improvements that have happened since our last get-together. And this is working. Great. So first, since we were just talking about artificial intelligence, here is a
Now you know why you have a Defense Innovation Board to help with the technical capability of the Department of Defense.
Okay. Fine. Okay. Great. We have an example of an autonomous system, obviously a non-lethal system, but in Pittsburgh Air Force Base, where Mike hails from, there was actually a significant problem with airmen getting infected with illness because of ticks and other risks. So they were able to come up with autonomous lawnmowers. But what's interesting is that they bought one, and then they have a plan to scale to 90, which is exactly the kind of prototyping iteration that we would like to see more of. Next slide. We also have seen the pioneering of commercial services openings and OTAs by DIU and others, but now this is an example of the use of those CSOs spreading. So we had an example here from the 305th Air Mobility Wing, where they were able to award contracts in 15 minutes and get the acquisition process down to 2 months. And so that's an example of recommendation number 6 on acquisition innovation. Or the next slide. NGA, taking to heart some of the recommendations from the SWAP study and on the bandwidth and compute recommendation, was able to create a virtualization of their network to allow them to understand using proxy data, unclassified proxy data, how they might be able to simulate their network using code, and then that enabled them to accelerate the benefits of being able to try out different software packages without having as much downtime. This is sort of modeling and simulation of the networks and the data. Next slide. Will Roper, who the board knows well, who runs acquisition for the Air Force, is trying to figure out how to simplify the complexity of the FAR and the acquisition code, and is developing a TurboTax-like automation system to enable acquisition officers to make better use of a wide variety of the sort of complex nuances of the acquisition code. So that should greatly help address the issue that you've heard about on many occasions, which is it's difficult for acquisition officers to understand the depth and breadth and complexity of what's actually in the acquisition code. One of many things Will Roper's doing, championing these things. Next. We are always been promoting use of emerging technologies in smaller companies, and here's another example. The 27th Special Operations Wing, there we go, was able to very quickly work with HiveMapper, which is able to use the data they collect to create 3D models for mission rehearsal. Next slide. I also wanted to mention the Missile Defense Agency specifically because they've also been able to make progress using the same sort of virtualization of their data to be able to do more automated testing and access more commercial servers. Next, I wanted to highlight Pilot Training Next, which actually a member of the DIB team is one of the airmen pilots that was able to create this. They were able to use AR and VR to very rapidly expand and accelerate pilot training. And actually, the pilots that are using the AR, VR training are exceeding the performance of the pilots who are doing the conventional training, which is pretty exciting. And they're able to use a lot of the data that they're getting from all those different sources to make sense of it. The problem they were having is there were so many different data streams that were having trouble modeling it. They were able to find a company that builds knowledge graphs to help them figure out how to integrate and accelerate that process. Next slide. One of the things we heard about from Jen at the beginning was some of the many frustrations that service members face as they're going through the different permutations of their moves, how they onboard. And so we wanted to commend the 192nd Operation Group for building a SMART tool, which is essentially an application that has cut the amount of time required to onboard into the Air Force dramatically and integrates all the different records into sort of portal, which has dramatically improved the quality of experience of the airmen. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to mention recommendation number 16, which was one of the recommendations from the Workforce Behavior and Culture Subcommittee, which was on training. The reason we chose all the examples that I just gave you is that every one of those examples of an accelerated innovation came out of the training course that was developed by the department in response to the board's recommendation. So we thought it was an exciting way to tell that story, to show that the input that you gave the department on developing training to teach people new ways of working actually led to all of the impact and the results we just described. If you turn to the next slide, here are all the organizations that have participated in the training that the department built as a result of recommendation 16, and I think it's pretty exciting to see the impact of one of your recommendations on changing the culture. The next slide, I also wanted to mention, which is, it really connects in many ways to the first recommendation about building a community of the innovators, is that one of our partner organizations, Ensign, the National Security Innovation Network, has now created a portal where anyone in the department now can create an online community to share best practices of these kinds of ideas. And we wanted to make sure that everyone in the public and in the department knew about this great resource. The DIB's about to start using it. So with that, let me quickly turn it over to my colleague, Jeff, to share a couple of slides updating you on the progress of the software study.
Essentially, the tech here is great. I get to click backwards to go forward, which is kind of neat. So I'm going to go really quickly because we're a little bit behind schedule. When Dr. Schmidt said that the board creates recommendations and ideas and throws them to DoD, I was the one that the SWAP study hit in the head, so I got to receive that and pull together some efforts to try and help. There we go. So probably about 18 months ago, the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Ellen Lord, really wanted to start emphasizing the importance of software in our acquisition system and in our weapon systems. The Defense Science Board had released a study about software acquisition a little before that, and then the Defense Innovation Board released their software acquisition and practices study with 10 major recommendations. Those are the 10 major recommendations from the SWAP study. The DSB study is over here. They were mainly along 4 lines of effort, and so what we did is we took the 4 lines of effort, and my strategy to have the department embrace these, especially once people move on, it was to find the most senior government civilian, permanent government civilian, so non-political appointee, that I could find to become my line of effort champion for these things. And so these are the individuals that volunteered. From the workforce perspective and all of the human capital initiatives, it was formerly Jose Gonzalez, now it's Gary Shafawaloff. That's there, I got it. He's the incoming director for human capital initiatives. So he's championing the line of effort B, which was the people one, I think. Yeah. From platform, which is enterprise infrastructure, Peter Ranks from the CIO, the deputy CIO for information enterprise, is my line of effort champion there. And for line of effort A and D, which were really the policy and process pieces, is Ms. Stacey Cummings, who is the principal deputy to Kevin Fahey in the A and the acquisition person and acquisition and sustainment. So this is where I sort of say we're at with these things, and I think for the process and policy, we're even further along. I'll do really quickly how we're. I'll give you some specifics. So from the people perspective, the biggest thing we've done is we have actually identified at least 20 different software development activities in the DoD that are using modern software development practices and doing a good job. That's a lot more than we thought we would find. So we're now creating a community where they can share best practices, share tooling, share hiring practices, share techniques to recruit, retain personnel. So that's kind of a community effort there. Those are just some of the logos of those units. From an enterprise, one of the big lines of recommendations was that we create enterprise infrastructure to support software development. You'll probably know that the JEDI contract, the very popular JEDI contract, was awarded last Friday. We also have, it was very popular, I think. We also have the DOS contract, which is an office automation contract, but also includes a whole suite of collaboration tools that can help developers. And then the Air Force is really pushing ahead with a thing called Cloud One and Platform One, which is the Air Force's enterprise capability, and the acquisition and sustainment and the CIO are partnered with the Air Force to use those things all as enterprise capabilities also. Yesterday, in fact, there was a memo release jointly signed by the DoD CIO and the Undersecretary for Acquisitions and Sustainment that makes DevSecOps and enterprise capabilities the preferred and default mechanism for software development in the DoD. So you'll see that trickle out publicly here very soon. I can't go back, I'm told. Can you go back, please? Yeah, so this, in acquisition and sustainment, we're revamping the entire acquisition framework. So this is the new 5000.02, if you're familiar with that DoD instruction. It's the adaptive acquisition framework. This should come out sometime in January. You'll notice the 4th pathway down is a software acquisition pathway, which is a brand new pathway, way to do software that is iterative. It is not gated with milestones. Yeah.
It's like correct.
Yeah. So there's no major milestone gates. It never ends. It's continuous engineering of software and continuous release of capability to the field for warfighting effect. And then the last but not least, one of the recommendations was a single appropriation, a single type of money for software. This actually turns out, I think, maybe to be the heaviest lift from a bureaucracy standpoint, because as soon as you touch the money, everybody's concerned. And I don't know if this is my little subtle joke, the little symbol on the top is the Bitcoin symbol, because I call this project the software money project, which Bitcoin is kind of software money. We do have a thing that we're going to be able to pilot. The comptroller in the DoD has to lead this effort, and they are working with acquisition and sustainment. And we're going to pilot some projects in 2021 is about the quickest we can do this. Pilot about 8 projects using a single appropriation of funding. And if that pilot goes well, then we'll go back to Congress and ask for an actual software title, which would be on par with research and development, operations and maintenance, military construction, et cetera. So if you have questions, please reach out to me.
I only have one comment. Which is,
Yes, please.
remember the fundamental premise of the SWAP study is small, incremental. So can you change the B to an M in the Bitcoin symbol up there?
Sure, okay, yeah.
Well, my comment,
Okay.
my comment is this may be ultimately the most important thing we collectively do, because to establish the software pathway, to establish a color of money, Milo's talked about this for a long time, that would be a major accomplishment in the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is very change resistant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the software pathway will be signed out as interim acquisition guidance in December. We're on the path to sign that out in December. And there was a cruel trick was played on me when the the SWAP report was published. My email is on the back cover. So if you want to reach out with that, have any questions on any of this, please look at the back cover of the SWAP report and you can find me.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for bearing with us through some of those technical difficulties, but we do have a few moments for comments. And so if you'd like to make a comment, please make your way to one of the microphones. Perfect. And sorry, there's a little bit of glare, so I can't see. I think that's, well, go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, how are you? My name is Angel Smith. I work, I'm one of the directors over the Microsoft Innovation and Policy Center here in Washington, D.C. I'm also a retired Marine that started at Microsoft about 18 months ago in the throes of Techlash, and I found myself interestingly leading a little bit of a crusade to defend the Department of Defense and its ethical standards. So I wanted to just make a real quick comment. A thanks to the board for the work that you're doing on the AI Ethics and Principles Project. It's one thing to come to defend the Department of Defense from a position of experience. It's a completely another thing to be able to point to the work that the DIB is doing, the Department of Defense is doing, in conjunction with a fluid conversation with the tech industry to help outline what those ethical standards are. The work that you've done is actually going to not only give the leadership of the tech industry a really good foundation to justify that the work they're doing with the Department of Defense, but it's also giving a lot of the employees that work inside the tech industry a reason to support the DoD in a way that they haven't been able to do so before. So it's good to see the DoD taking a leadership role in this position. Two quick questions for Jen. The first one is, so I also have the luxury of working with the Microsoft Software Systems Academy, which is a program designed to pull veterans to work in the tech industry. One of the things that we've been talking about recently was if there's a mechanism where we could possibly move into active duty service members to help, reinforce, give them a stronger AI kind of background inside the DoD. The consensus inside the company right now, though, is we have better luck putting a cow on Saturn than we would be able to infiltrate the DoD education bureaucracy. So one of my thoughts is, Microsoft certainly doesn't have a monopoly on this type of education program. The tech industry's got them all over the place. Is there any consideration to possibly working with partnering the tech industry to help reinforce a stronger AI workforce inside the DoD? And then the other one is have you considered any infiltration of the professional military education system across all ranks in a way that would start making the services think more clearly, implementing AI across all MOSs and all career fields inside the DoD, rather than just a couple of niche fields? Thank you.
I want to thank you for what I'll reframe as a comment, because I'm not allowed to answer the question, but I very much appreciate the comments.
Yeah, and thank you for your service.
Yes. My name is Hirak Christian Kim. I'm the president of Georgetown Collaborative Diplomacy Initiative here at Georgetown University, and we're the primary group focused on researching, discussing, and propagating alternative diplomacy methodology for global peace. I went to discussion at Institute for World Politics and had a discussion with a top professor there who used to be a top operative of the US Covert Operations, CIA, about artificial intelligence. And there seems to be general consensus in the intelligence world, and I've also talked to the president of the National Engineering Foundation, and he also agrees that Chinese artificial intelligence is far superior to US artificial intelligence right now. Now, though, It was in the context of South Korea, North Korea engagement discussion, and the main speaker was the former Secretary of Defense of South Korea, and his proposal is to arm South Korea with nuclear defense, nuclear weapons, with or without U.S. help. And one of the reasons I am assessing in my own assessment is that our allies are beginning to become nervous because they know that artificial intelligence is far advanced in China than United States. So Turkey wants a nuclear weapon. Iran wants a nuclear weapon, but that was on old news. South Korea now wants nuclear weapons. Japan wants nuclear weapons because they do not feel secure that United States military is at a strategic advantage around the world to defend their interests. And so I guess that's a comment that I just wanted to make, something that you can think about.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And we are going to run just a very few minutes over because I do want everyone standing up here to have a chance to comment, but please do try to keep your comment germane to the topics of the meeting and a couple of minutes of duration. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning. Lieutenant Commander Stevie Greenway from PMW 240. First, I want to say that was great putting the talent acquisition first and foremost. My advice would be to get the senior enlisted leaders involved. So your Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, that's how you can get the enlisted to figure out who is the best within the mess decks there. Also, selfishly, I am running a successful prototype using the IWRP consortium, using another transactional authority, that we are putting PII in an IL2 environment. So the problem is we don't have funding to move forward. So to go into that production.
Just remember, we can't respond to questions.
Oh, no. Oh, no. I am just letting you know that we are trying to innovate, and there are some walls there. So.
And what's the name of your group?
So I'm part of PMW 240, sir, and the project that we're doing is called Authoritative Data Environment 3.0. So that's where we're trying to put it in the commercial cloud, not the Gov cloud, but the commercial cloud.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much. Yes.
Hey everyone, so Captain Steve Lover with AFWorks. Very quickly, under 2 minutes. First, I want to make a plug for the open dual-use SBIR topic. If you are a small business, US-owned, less than 500 employees, that would like to quickly and easily do business with the Air Force, just Google open SBIR topic. You can learn all you need to know. But this question is actually about workforce mobility, the very first topic that we had. This is very, very relevant. I think for the bold changes that we need, and I think we need bold changes, typically if there's a very clear existential threat, that is when these things start to move. I think the cyber threat is a little bit more insidious, right? It's not a tank coming to our borders, so the American public maybe doesn't digest it in the same way. So in the absence of that clear threat, how do we do these things? I think one is call it an experiment. It takes a lot of the teeth out of the things and a lot of the fear, because if you fail in an experiment, then you met the goal, right? An experiment by nature can fail. So that's an easy one. Have clear metrics, have very clear design to this experiment and an endpoint in mind. The second one, though, is kind of an idea. So this is a lot of people are afraid of losing resources for their readiness, right? They have people who are flying the mission, doing the mission right now. If we take people away, it hurts that existing mission, and that's very difficult to do. There's a lot of automation to be had, though, during those missions. So what if we set a bound that says, look, if you automate yourself out of a job, you keep your time, and that is where you unlock the ability to go do some of these things, specifically relating to digital. In fact, two quick examples. The CIA, this is open source, had a program where when they were trying to hire their agents, they would invite them to a meeting, and they tell them the wrong meeting spot. And if they figured out where the actual meeting was, well, then that was one of the things that helped to get them hired, right? So that's one. Another is, we've seen examples of this, of someone who said, hey, this work is redundant. I can save hours and hours of time within the Air Force, and I can go do something else. And some of those folks are making major impact in the Air Force today. So what I would say is put it out there to everyone, to senior leaders, and then on down to say, if your airmen save time, if your DoD members save time, they can put it back towards becoming proficient in some kind of digital skill. Over. Thanks.
Thank you. And let me say we love AFWorks.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Stuart Wagner. I recently started working for the Chief Data Officer, Michael Conlin, and left Microsoft. I've followed your board now for a couple of years, and I'm really excited by the work you've been doing. I wanted to note that in my first 3 weeks here, the first thing I tried to do was install Git on my computer, and I couldn't do it. I've found an interesting challenge as a data scientist that I'd like to kind of explore with data, but I'm limited with 2 gigabytes of RAM on my computer and have no cloud environment to put that data and analyze it in a collaborative environment. So it would be great if we could start having a conversation about getting the tooling available so that data scientists like those on my team can do the work that's important for the government. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, this is Guru from US WebSoft. We're a small business. And I would like to know specifically within the artificial intelligence when it comes to facial recognition in terms of how the hiring or any the racial profiling bias, it could be addressed because this is something that was discussed in other forums. I wanted to know your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, over here.
Hi, I'm Elaine Thompson. I work for Henry Jackson. I'm supporting a digital pathology initiative that uses AI to diagnose cancer. We're working with Google. I see heads nodding. One of our biggest challenges has been to be able to get into a cloud environment to work with healthcare data. And so I'm hoping the board will address some of the challenges around the authorization to operate process and how difficult and time-consuming it can be for groups to access secure cloud environments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Jason Brown. I'm a colonel in the Air Force. I'm also a grad student here at Georgetown. I helped stand up the Joint AI Center, led their humanitarian assistance initiative for the first year, and I'm also working with Daniela for the Air Force MIT AI effort.
Thank you very much for all of that.
The first thing, as someone who develops AI for the department, I couldn't thank you enough for the effort that you've done with regard to the AI ethics principles. I think it's incredibly important for us to understand, what duties we have with respect to developing AI, what duties we have to those making decisions, duties we have to those who are users, duties to those in the operating environment, and a clear understanding of whom we need to protect and what we need to do as we deploy this technology. The second point is related to recommendation number 16. I know we talked a lot about the cultivating digital talent at lower ranks. I think it's incredibly important that we focus on senior ranks as much as we do at the lower ranks, if not more. I think that those at senior ranks have grown up in a culture that doesn't emphasize interdisciplinary or multifunctional skills. And so I can't tell you how many times I hear general officers saying, I'm just fill in the blank, a maintenance officer, a fighter pilot, et cetera. So I think we need to change that culture. We need to get to a point where those officers, those leaders, essentially are embarrassed if they can't explain machine learning, user-centered design, agile software development, et cetera. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am, you'll be the last question.
Thank you, Marina Theodotou, Defense Acquisition University. Thank you so much for the great work you're doing. Recently at DAU, pointing to your culture and people workforce committee, we produced a TEDx DAU, which was a great example of reaching the workforce. And data point here is 14,500 views of the 12 TED Talks that were produced in 8 weeks. So I wanted to ask the board whether you have considered exploring collaboration with universities, DoD universities, to help you scale out your efforts and also help you better articulate some of the needs in a more practical and operational manner so that a lot of your recommendations can be not only recommended at the OSD level, but also implemented at the lower ranks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Josh?
Well, everyone, I just wanted to thank the board members and the audience for bearing through what is one of our more exciting, occasionally challenging, and certainly by sheer number of voted recommendations, productive meeting. I wanted to let everyone know we'll be meeting again in Washington, D.C., probably in February. I hope all of you will join us again. And I just wanted to offer you the opportunity to offer a closing remark.
A couple of things. First, I'm enormously proud of the quality of the work. You've now seen and we've showcased what the depth of what we're doing. My comment to Jeff was what I really think, which is that if we can just get the money structure around software, that will be a Herculean achievement, right, alone. And that follows on the SWAP study, the work on 5G, the work on principles, and so forth. I also want to remind everybody that the way this AI ethics maneuver works is we are making a proposal to the DoD. There is no rule that says that they have to do what we suggest or vice versa. Our job is to give them advice. This is our formal transmitted advice to them. And I, for one, do not know exactly what their response will be, and they may not either. They may have to have their own process to go through it. And then next time, Josh, maybe we can discuss using a different technology. I can think of one I use every day that's somewhat more responsibly latent than, than the one we chose today. Thank you, guys. I'm sorry for our 20-second delay, guys, and we'll see if we can get that fixed.
Good. Well, thank you to our board members that bared with us on the phone and all of you. If you are a member of the media, please come forward to the podium. Alyssa is here to greet you. And if you would all just remain in your seats so the board members have a chance to leave. Stage left. Thank you all. Our meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, no, definitely not.